of one of our most esteemed and senior advisors, Admiral Dennis McGinn, who is a Vice Admiral, U.S. Navy retired. He is also the former Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He is also the former President and CEO of the American Council on Renewable Energy. He is a board member of various organizations, as you can see there. But most importantly, for all involved, he is the only person on this webinar today that has turned down Tom Cruise not once, but twice for participating in Top Gun movies. And he refused to let him have his airplanes. And I love that about him. So without further ado, let me turn you over to a good friend and a guy who knows more about the bioeconomy than most of us will ever know, Admiral McGinn.
Thank you very much, JD. Welcome, everybody. We're going to have a good, fun conversation here. These are times that we are all working through changes. This is a big election outcome, and clearly there are a lot of questions about what does this mean to us in the bioeconomy. So you may ask yourself the question, what's a former fighter pilot, Navy carrier pilot doing talking about the bioeconomy? I start with this. Our energy security, economic security, and environmental security are all inextricably linked. And they really consist of the pillars or make up the pillars of our overall national security. What is national security? It starts at the individual level, family, community, national, and indeed the global level. It all has to do with safety, health, and quality of life. So during these turbulent political times, we can't lose sight of the fact that things keep moving forward in terms of Mother Nature, global warming, climate change, in terms of the ability of taking smart people, putting technology to work in contributing to our energy security, our economic security, and our environmental security. So despite what seem to be very large changes in the United States government, we are going to continue to see the bioeconomy driven forward by these large global effects. And we're going to talk about that today. But we also, as JD said, welcome your questions. Use the Q&A button to send those to us, and we'll have a good discussion. I also want to let you know this is the beginning of a discussion, of an important conversation. So following this webinar, you're going to have the ability to reach out to our panelists for more detailed answers. We're not going to be able to get to all of the questions that we already have, but we want to make sure that we address the ones that you have on your mind, some during the webinar that we're about to embark on, and others will follow up. So we'll keep the conversation going. Okay, if I could have the next slide, please, Ryan. This is our wonderful panel. Up on the upper left, Amber Mahone. I'll talk more about each of these individuals in detail, but she's the managing partner for E3, Energy, Environment, Economics, great research group located in the Bay Area. Upper right, Betsy Dirksen Londrigan is the administrator for the Rural Business-Cooperative Service in USDA, and a longtime person who has been involved in rural development and economic development overall. Lower left, Ernie Shea is the president, Solutions from the Land. We'll learn more about that from Ernie, but longtime good friend globally, and he talks to farmers and talks farm language and really knows what's going on, not just nationally, but globally. And then lower right, Mathilde, joining us from Amsterdam, known internationally as an expert and consultant in food regulation, in the future of food, alternative proteins, and she will talk more about the work that she is doing in the public sector and the private sector as well. So if we could have the next slide, Ryan. We're going to start with Betsy. Betsy is in office, in fact, as the Administrator, Rural Business Cooperative Services. And we've asked Betsy to kind of baseline us as far as what has happened over the past 4 years or so in the United States, specifically the Department of Agriculture, what are the things, the programs, if you will, the policies, the investment opportunities that have really helped to change the bioeconomy in a good direction? It will baseline us as far as when we think about going forward, challenges and opportunities. We'll have this as a baseline for this is where we are now in these critical programs that deliver in one form or another food, fiber, and fuel for not just the United States, but for the world. Betsy, go ahead, over to you.
Thank you, Admiral McGinn. Such a pleasure to be here. And we're going to have to follow up on that Tom Cruise story because that sounds like I'm missing out on some really fun Denny information. So hi, everybody. I'm Betsy, Administrator for Rural Business and Cooperative Service. And we are one agency in U.S. Department of Agriculture. You know, it's an enormous agency, and it really has the distinction of touching every single person in the United States and, frankly, most people around the world. My area, Rural Business and Cooperative Service, our mission is to contribute to improving the quality of life and economic opportunity for people in small towns through business, job creation, and renewable energy investments. So where does the bioeconomy come in? Oh my gosh, it comes in everywhere in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and particularly through our agency. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just give you a little overview of some of the programs and some of the specific areas that we touch the bioeconomy. Our reach is profound. We my specific agency, our portfolio exceeds $13 billion in assets. And since the Biden-Harris administration took office, the investments in our rural communities and in the bioeconomy have been profound. It's actually reached historic levels under this administration. And we have offices in every single state in the nation, plus the US Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have staff who are based in the states as well as national staff. That's an important distinction because we have area offices throughout every state in the nation. And that means that our team members are part of the communities that they're serving. So there's really no distance between rural development staff members and the communities that they're serving. Just a different structure for federal government. Where are we with the bioeconomy? Well, with EO 14081, USDA got to work quickly. In 23, our research agencies invested over $500 million in investments and development. Forest Service has already given $72 million in catalytic investments. We have another almost $400 million that we are partnering with Forest Service to deploy in the timber production expansion guaranteed loan program. That's yet to be announced, so don't tell anybody I told you, but now you know. It should be announced in the next 2 weeks. We've also focused over $150 million in specifically to advance biofuels and biofuel infrastructure. And as part of the larger USDA mission, our Climate Smart Commodities Partnership has been incredible. In the last 2 years, invested over $3 billion, supporting more than 21,000 farms, encompassing more than 5 million acres. It's a specific focus on biomass with an investment of over $270 million. Hopefully most of you have read the Building a Resilient Biomass Supply report that we announced in March of this year. If you haven't, there's a link here, and I encourage you to do it because one of the things that everybody in the bioeconomy wants to know is about feedstock. And I think it's a really special space that we, that we sit in at rural development because we represent those rural communities. And the top line is the feedstock is available in the United States and it's in our rural communities. And we are the folks who can connect people to those rural communities and also support the rural communities in this reindustrialization of the United States. Next. And one of the things that Denny asked me to do was just give you a little overview of where the money has gone with the Inflation Reduction Act. And so I wanted to highlight a couple of the investments in our renewable energy systems through the Inflation Reduction Act. Some of these investments, they represent the largest investment in rural utilities since rural electrification. And these investments are going to touch rural Americans throughout the nation. Rural Utility Services made an announcement in Wisconsin recently. Fascinating, because that one investment is already going to touch 1 in 5 Americans in rural communities. 20%, incredible. And it's just that funding is just being deployed now. In our area,
I'll mention, Betsy, editorially that and there's a lot of discussion about, with the new administration coming in, looking to trim the budget or reorient the budget, whatever way. And there's a lot of concern about, gee, is the IRA going to be really gutted? My sense is that this is all about economic development, whether it's rural development or economic development overall. And the people who are benefiting directly from these investments and the industries and jobs that are being created make a tremendously strong business case for keep this momentum going. So well done to you and colleagues at the USDA in moving this forward and continuing to deploy it. My sense is that fears about losing a lot of the impetus from the IRA is unfounded at this point. We're going to have strong business case for economic and rural development. Thanks, Betsy.
Yeah, well, and Denny, in response to that, thank you for that. And what I would say is that that's what we hope, right? We hope that the case is made. At USDA, since we can't be the ones, we're not allowed to lobby. We can't be the ones out there making that case, and so we really do rely on our partners to make that case on their behalf, frankly, to make sure that all the representatives in Congress know that this funding is important, that it's making a difference, and that it's necessary, and that we need to hold on to it.
Great.
Yep, next slide. Just a couple more numbers. One of the things I like to make sure people know about with rural development in particular is that, because a lot of times when we think about like Department of Energy or Department of Defense and some of these larger agencies, when we're talking about a $3 billion investment, it may be all in one shot, or they're big numbers. Rural development, particularly my agency, doesn't really function that way. And so when we talk about deploying funds, we're talking about deploying funds at a much smaller scale. So the fact that we are reaching these extraordinarily high numbers is representative of thousands and thousands of projects all over the nation, and some as low as $10,000, and then obviously bigger ones that may be more like $1 million, or with loans up to $25 million each. Next slide, please. This is an important one. The Higher Blends Infrastructure Incentive Program. Anybody involved in biofuels typically knows about this program. It's how we help gas stations and distribution facilities pay for the infrastructure. It's costly. We know it's great for the producers. It's an economic driver. And so again, this is funding that we want to hold on to. It was ramped up significantly by the IRA funding, and we'd love more. Next one, please. Ryan, would you go to the next slide, the bio-preferred slide? I just want people to know about what it is.
There it is.
So the what?
Great. I think we have our preferred program up there, Betsy.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe my internet. I'm sorry. I'm in Southern Indiana right now, and so maybe my internet is just not keeping up. So the Bio-Preferred program is really the government's answer to market, to driving the market. And this is an opportunity for products to be able to get a verified USDA label stating the content of their bio-based product. It's a very simple program. It's it's easy for businesses to go through the verification process, and there's two parts to the program really, because one is on the federal procurement side, and then one, of course, is just on the consumer side. But we love this program, all voluntary, easy to access, and it lets consumers know what percentage of content is bio-based in any product. And then the last program I want to highlight for you is a big kahuna in our portfolio. It's the Biorefinery Renewable Chemical and Bio-Based Product Manufacturing Guaranteed Loan Program. It's up to $250 million. It's a phased program. And I know that there's probably a lot of people on the call right now who are sitting back and going, yes, Betsy, we know about that program. But oh my gosh, it's really difficult. We don't have the funding to run the integrated demonstration unit for 120 days. Well, Brian, go to the next slide, please. Because we worked with Secretary Vilsack and got $200 million in CCC funds to create a separate program, the Bio-Based Market Development and Access Grant Program. The only people who are eligible for funding are the people who have gone through phase 1 of the Section 9003 guaranteed loan program. Because this is us answering your call. We know you're stuck. We know there's a need for funding. It's not just a USDA problem. That's an industry problem. We get that. But this is our answer to it, to help the folks who are in the program and stuck get funding to build or run their IDU, to get all the way through to the guaranteed loan. So these are just some of the things that we've got going on at USDA in support of the bioeconomy. And, we're all in. We know that this is the most important opportunity for rural communities, probably in the history of, in their economic history. And so we are very excited about everything that's coming down the pike.
Thanks a lot, Betsy. That is a good summary. And as I mentioned when Betsy began, this kind of gives us a baseline about where we are. These programs are real. They're underway. They're making a difference across the United States with related effects, positive effects to our trading partners as well. Betsy's going to be with us throughout the panel right up until before the last 15 minutes. She may have to leave for another important meeting, but we'll come back to Betsy with any of your questions. That was a great summary. If we could have the next slide, Ryan. I'd like to introduce Amber Mahone. Amber is based in the Bay Area, although she travels globally and certainly nationally. She is the managing director or managing partner of Energy and Environmental Economics. E3 may be well known to many of you. It's a world-class analysis group and is focused with public and private partners doing all kinds of analysis. It could be related to government programs, big utilities, private sector companies. They're related to decarbonization, electrification, and many, many other things. And we'll have Amber start, but I want to make the point that Amber has a headquarters in California, which happens to be about, last time I checked, the 5th largest economy in the world. So we've all seen the effect of what happens in California can influence many, many activities and investments beyond the border of California. So Amber, welcome, and we look forward to your comments.
Great. Thanks, Denny, and thank you to LEC for inviting me to this panel. I don't have any slides to present. I just wanted to share some of my thoughts, as Denny suggested, around what we might expect under the next administration and how that may impact the bioeconomy. At E3, we spend a lot of time thinking about the energy sector. So we're a consultancy focused on the clean energy transition, primarily focused in the electric sector, actually. But as we have seen, the electric sector affects every aspect of our energy economy. And as we start to electrify transportation and end uses in buildings, it's increasing its touch points across the economy. So I'll start by saying, some of the macro trends that we're seeing in the energy sector, we don't expect to be influenced by politics or policies. The big one that everyone's talking about right now in the energy sector is the impact of artificial intelligence and data centers on electricity demand. And we're seeing with our utility clients across the country just massive increase in need for capacity and energy. And that's playing out in terms of new transmission needs, as well as new generation. The other macro trend that we're seeing is around electrification, and that is of both the transportation sector and also in buildings. Now, interestingly, under the Biden era Inflation Reduction Act, we see incentives for EVs, we've seen incentives for heat pumps in buildings, as well as tax credits for clean energy. And we have certainly heard the Trump administration's plans and interest in rolling back a lot of those incentives. We also have heard and expect a potential rollback in the EPA's emission performance standards for vehicles. So we do expect that under the next 4 years, we would see some softening of electric vehicle sales and electric demand, which could lead to, some increases on the margins in liquid fuel demand, which will, of course, influence the bioeconomy as we have blend requirements for ethanol and also biodiesel. That said, on balance, we still expect that the macro trends around the cost reductions that we're seeing in batteries to continue to drive economic decisions on behalf of consumers towards electric vehicle adoption, just at a slower pace than we would have seen most likely under a Harris administration. The other trend that I expect is increased policy action at the state level. And we saw this under the first Trump administration as well. Where I am in California, we've worked really closely with the California Air Resources Board for many years as they have sought to implement the state's climate legislation and implement a scoping plan to lay out the plan for how the state will comply with the carbon targets that the state has set. And that entails a lot of local policy, including the low carbon fuel standard, which has been a major driver of biofuel demand in California, as well as a trend towards towards vehicle electrification. I think other states are also following that lead, and we expect to see state-driven policies that would drive demand both for biofuels, bioenergy, as well as electrification.
Amber, if I could interject,
please.
one of the great things about E3 is that you deal with facts, you deal with great objective analysis, and your clients, be they public governments at the federal or state level or even local level, and private sector clients, have the ability to make business decisions based on that objective analysis. So surely in the realm of politics, opinions matter, but also when you're thinking about changing a major policy at the federal level, it's going to be influenced hopefully by what is happening at the state level. And I think that, to your point, California is, by virtue of its size, its scale, and really some of the advanced technologies that are already in place, is going to have a major positive impact on the business case decisions of federal regulatory practice. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, as you mentioned at the outset, Denny, California is a major player in the global economy. One of the trends that we saw under the first Trump administration was an attempt to roll back California's waiver under the Clean Air Act, which, if you recall, allows California to set its own emission performance standards for vehicles. And what we saw was, even as there was a legal fight around the validity of that attempt to roll back the California's waiver, the vehicle manufacturers and the OEMs were still committed towards meeting those vehicle performance standards in California and continued manufacturing electric vehicles. So, I think that there's certainly going to be another attempt under the next administration to roll back or remove California's waiver under the Clean Air Act. But then, we still, I guess we'll see how the private sector responds, and we may continue to see vehicle OEMs manufacture EVs as a result. So there's a major interplay, I think, between federal policy and state policy, and it's not always as clear cut as we might think. We also know that corporations and the private sector feel strongly about their own voluntary climate goals that they have set, and that also continues to be a driver for clean energy procurement, completely independent of either federal or state policy.
Great, super, thanks. Good summary, and we'll get back to you. And please, based on your extensive analysis, Amber, feel free to chime in on other topics as they come up with our additional panelists. Thanks.
Thanks, Denny. Yeah.
Mathilde, if I could have Ryan, Mathilde's summary slide. While Ryan is getting that up there, I just want to say that we are absolutely privileged to have Mathilde Doce with us, a global citizen. She's coming to us from later in the day from Amsterdam, but she is known internationally as a tremendously talented and experienced food law professional, and talk about regulatory affairs at the subnational level, national level, and of course global as well. She has worked in Europe, Asia, North and South America, and basically, I love one of the best descriptions of what Mathilde does. It's basically food regulation for non-lawyers, and that's really a key thing these days as we get more and more wrapped around legal axes. Understanding what the common sense approach is on the food regulation and law is really important. Mathilde, welcome, and great to have you, and look forward to your comments.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Denis. So I'm going to do without the slide because I don't see them as well. So my name is Mathilde Doce. I'm based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, but I'm French. Thank you so much. I only have a legal background. I picked up the food science part on the side, and I work for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN in Rome. I work for national agencies in France and in Asia. Work also for ADM, that is mostly known in the food industry, but they are a food ingredient supplier to B2B companies. So Kraft, Mondelez, Nestle, Danone, they buy from ADM. And I do a lot of conferences where I talk on the future of food, and bioeconomy is one of the topic. And yeah, like what I see, like comparison between the EU and the US, like both regions are lacking some public fundings because startups, they need a lot of funds to be able to scale up their technology. And what is the biggest barrier in terms of regulatory access, or like what can prevent company to launch their product ASAP, is to gain pre-market approval. And in the US, there is a system that is widely used by food companies in the bioeconomy, which is called GRAS. That stands for Generally Recognized as Safe. And basically, any food substance that has not been consumed before 1958 is considered a food additive. So you will normally have to do a food petition to the FDA. If not, then you can have it generally recognized as safe under the GRAS system. And many foods, more advanced food ingredients have been assessed as such under the GRAS system, such as cell-based chicken from the company called Upside Foods. We also have some fungi or mushroom-derived ingredients, for instance, anything mycelium based. There is a company in the US called Nature Finds that is doing this. And overall, it's most of these companies, they rely on private funding, so they raise from venture capital firms. But we need more support from agencies to help these companies navigate the regulatory framework. And there are also some initiative at the international level, because we don't really have in the legal space a clear definition about bioeconomy. We have biomaterials, most of the time used in packaging and so on, at least in the food industry. But I've noticed that in the US, the term bioengineered is widely used, while in other regions, like in Europe, we use the term GMO. And in both cases, we need to label the product to signal to people why this product has an added value and how it's also safe for them to consume that type of products. But at least in certain regions, like in Europe, GMO food is not actually well understood. So it's very rare in Europe to find a GM label food, because most of the time people are not willing to consume it, sadly.
Mathilde, globally, but certainly nationally in the United States, there's been a lot of discussion about so-called deregulation, to try to make it easier for companies to do business, to deliver value, and in a safe way, but to do it with less bureaucratic regulations. What do you see happening? I mean, this is clearly a rhetorical, certainly, priority by the Trump administration. Are you seeing the beginnings of any significant change in food regulation?
Regarding the GRAS system, yes,
Yes.
because usually a GRAS substance can be sold across the US, but then you have some federated states that decided to implement some ban. Florida tried to do it, for instance, for cell-based meat, still ongoing. And it's also maybe even less funding for the FDA, because in theory, to get a non-questions letter from the FDA, so to prove that your food ingredient is safe, you should wait around 6 months, but in practice, it takes at least a year. So we cannot have a system that is supporting innovation if the system is underfunded. And yeah, that's the main issue. And there are also some talks on the other side to remove the GRAS framework to help companies sell, like to put the products on the market faster. But my only concern is if we don't have the system anymore, who is going to check that the food is actually safe? So two approach and then two different results.
Yeah, it's that the tension that has existed for many decades between speed to market and safety and assurance. So it moves a little bit one way or the other, but stays within some broad bounds. Thanks.
Denny, can I jump
Okay.
in with a question as well, or did you want to move to
Sure,
Ernie next?
go ahead, Amber.
Well, I was just curious, Mathilde, what you're seeing from your clients or hearing in Europe around the prospect of increased tariffs on European imports to the United States or exports. You know, I know that the US is a major exporter of wood pellets, for example, to Europe, and so yeah, I'm just curious what you're hearing or how the reactions have been around the discussions of tariffs.
So having like tariffs higher is like good news for no one. But the way it works is like both the US, the EU, almost every country in the world is part of the World Trade Organization, the WTO. And basically, members to this organization, they should not pass a measure that is a technical barrier to trade. If not, if they do it, then they are also exposed to sanctions from other countries. So most likely what other regions or country will do is to raise the tariff for another product category. But it's not always so simple to identify which one. Like I know, for instance, like wines from Europe are heavily taxed when they are imported to the US. But there is also a US product that is taxed the same just to compensate that.
So you think that, Mathilde, that organizations like the WTO will be kind of act as somewhat of a buffer, if you will, in pushing back against tariffs? Your comment, I thought, was very, very succinct, that tariffs aren't good for anybody for the most part. That's your global citizen perspective, I'm sure.
Yeah, so the WTO serves as a forum for sure, but they cannot really force a country not to pass a certain measure. It just gives the avenue to the other members to impose another section. So it's like there is no win-win situation. It's like if someone doesn't want to play by the rules, then other players, they can do the same.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that occurs to me is that so often in this global environment, technologically, economically, in terms of regulatory oversight, we make a mistake by thinking we can confine our changes inside national boundaries, whether it's national boundaries here in North America or in Europe or Asia, whatever, and that we need to really carefully consider the unintended consequences, if you will, of regulatory changes as it affects our international trade.
Yeah, totally. It's bioeconomy related in the sense that it's about wood. But in Europe, we were supposed to have a new regulation in place about fighting deforestation. So any ingredients that is known to contribute to deforestation, such as cacao, palm oil, coffee, wood, and then a couple more. Every product imported to the EU had to then disclose some information: who owns the land, was a part, like a plot of land deforested, and so on. And in theory, it's good because it would prevent Europeans to eat or consume products that are linked to destruction of the environment. But in practice, like the time that companies were given to comply with those requirements were deemed the time was deemed too short. So it has been pushed back to December next year. But I think we're gonna have like more lobbying from companies to have a measure that is both beneficial to the environment, but also doesn't prevent companies to keep on doing business or to have measures that are just impossible to comply with.
Great, thank you. In the general category of things international, I'd like to next introduce, and Mathilde will also be staying in the conversation as we go forward, but I'd like to introduce Ernie Shea. Ernie leads an organization called Solutions from the Land. And Solutions from the Land is an organization that is driven by farmers, people who really know what's going on. It's very, very innovative. It obviously is focused on best use of soil, water, maintaining air quality, and being really a net positive for carbon sequestration. Ernie is recently back from Baku, Azerbaijan, where he attended COP29, Conference of the Parties 29, and certainly based on that, plus other engagements on a regular basis at the United Nations here and in Africa, can give us an international perspective as well as how that relates to things happening inside the new administration and here in the United States. Ernie, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Denny. It's great to see you again. We go back many years working together to address these global challenges. And a special thank you to Lee Enterprises for hosting today's webinar on the bioeconomy. A little bit more, maybe just to start, about who I am, what our organization is about. As Denny said, I work for a group of very visionary farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners under the not-for-profit group Solutions from the Land. And this is a group of leaders that's working to advance land-based solutions to global challenges, which are many. And we use the Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations has established as our North Star. So we're constantly thinking about how we can become, through innovation and technology and through sustainable production systems, relevant in today's world. And towards that end, we're advancing what we call a 21st century renaissance of agriculture, where farms and ranches and woodlands are going to be known for more than just producing food and fiber and energy. We've come a long way over millennia to get to the point where we are today with agriculture meeting societal needs. But the good news story is we can do other things concurrently. We can filter and store water. We can sequester carbon. We can enhance biodiversity. We can improve public health. And ultimately, this comes down to improving quality of life. So what we're trying to do with our Renaissance is help people reimagine what agriculture is all about. It's not just the folks that produce commodities or food. It's the sector that's actually delivering quality of life. We do this working in the United States at the state level, where we bring together folks that are thinking over the horizon, and we help them develop strategies and action plans to maximize all of the goods and services that they deliver from the land. And then we elevate those recommendations to Washington, where we work with policymakers and agencies like USDA to try to bring forward the platforms that are needed to help farmers be successful in delivering these quality of life services. We then take those experiences and bring them globally into the debates that are taking place in the UN system around climate action, around food security, around biodiversity, around environment. And doing that, we are accredited entities in 4 UN platforms, FAO in Rome, the Climate Convention based in Bonn, the Environmental Program based in Nairobi, and the UN Water Conference. And we bring these farmers who have been experimenting and working to be more efficient and more sustainable into the rooms where others are debating the future of agriculture. And what's surprising to me, and maybe I was naive when I went to my first UN session back in probably 2005 or 6, was how few real world people are in these discussions. There's lots of actors that are debating and competing, trying to shape the future of agriculture, but farmers have been underrepresented, and that's why we go. So to the question, Denny, of what's my outlook for the bioeconomy following the election, I'm very positive in terms of the outlook. Sure, there's going to be some challenges and maybe some rollbacks of incentives that we've been depending upon, but the reality is that the challenges that the nation and the world is facing are so enormous that we need every tool in the toolbox to deliver. And so much of the focus has been lately around climate change, and sometimes we've missed the crisis that's occurring around the globe right now with food and nutrition insecurity, with biodiversity loss. These co-joint challenges that are often referred to as the triple threat challenges undermine security around the world, undermine quality of life. And when that happens, Denny, to your point, you create unstable situations where people become desperate and people start acting out and conflict develops and things spin out of control quickly. And we see that over and over again around the world. So we're showing up with the good news story that agriculture and the bioeconomy can deliver solutions that are going to address these challenges. And as I've been thinking about, why this would resonate with the Trump administration, I keep coming back to the basics. A successful bioeconomy is going to create jobs. It's going to generate economic growth. It's going to improve national security. And these are all fundamental issues that the Trump campaign was focused on. So we're actually bringing something to the table that is going to be, we believe, with the right enabling policies, partnerships, and finance mechanisms, valued and rewarded. And we'll be dealing with this, not just in the context of a Trump administration in Washington, but through the leadership that the subnationals are providing, like California. The world leaders in the global space are not stepping back away from migrating towards a lower carbon intensity future, and they are going to be embracing increasingly the bioeconomy. And we see that in the G20. We see that in the work that's underway within the COP, where next year Brazil is going to be leading the COP presidency and hosting the next climate convention. They are all in on the bioeconomy. And I think that those are some examples, Denny, of a bright future for the bioeconomy as we navigate through these uncertain times.
Great, good summary, Ernie. It always, when I think about solutions from the land and many of the other sustainability initiatives that the United Nations has put forward and is making progress on, it comes down to efficiency. You mentioned efficiency. It is one example. How do you increase crop yield per acre of soil or per acre foot of water in a way that doesn't cause pollution or adverse effects? And because it's absolutely critical, this food crisis that exists in many parts of the world still is only going to get tougher in an environment in which we're fighting with Mother Nature and climate change. More to the point of this discussion in terms of challenges and opportunities with this change in administrations. What do you see happening? What would be the ideal aspects, if you will, of a United States Farm Bill going forward? And as you think about answering that question, let's put up the whole panel on our presentation format so that we can all contribute to the discussion here. So what do you think is going to happen with the Farm Bill? What needs to happen with the Farm Bill? What are the concerns that you may have? Why don't we start with Betsy, and we can just go around the table here.
Thank you. What we're hearing right now, one of the concerns that we've had, of course, is with regard to the Inflation Reduction Act funding and the way that it's supporting producers in particular to their annual savings for some of these renewable energy systems. It's around $32,000 a year. That's a lot for people who are functioning on really tight margins. The growth in that program is due to the Inflation Reduction Act funding, which is supposed to be scheduled out with tranches in 25, 26, and 27. And so what we're hearing with the Farm Bill, is, there's the potential that Congress is going to figure out how to take some of the funding that is kind of hanging out there now and embed it into the Farm Bill so that it comes back to the rural communities. So that's a real positive. We are a little bit more unclear about where some of the other funding will go. what we've tried to disperse as much of that as we can. But the programs like the guaranteed loan program for the biorefineries and bio-based product manufacturing, some of these programs that are termed orphan programs, in the Farm Bill, we're concerned about where those are going to end up. At this point, though, we're just hoping we get a Farm Bill.
Yeah, the Farm Bill, like most federal legislation, in fact, not just in the U.S., but across the globe, encompasses, in my view, the three R's. It is resources. What funds are going to be allocated for various purposes? It is regulation. What constraints or enhancements, if you will, on the other end of the spectrum are contained to enable increased scale up of good things happening. And then finally, and the most important one that sometimes we lose sight of as we put these bills together is results. The results that you've highlighted, Betsy, in terms of impacts of the IRA, for example, really make that imperative that as we move forward to a new farm bill, that all three R's, resources, regulation, and results are foremost. Amber, you deal in objective analysis all the time about various and make effective regulations based on objective analysis to governments. Thoughts on the Farm Bill or other areas of regulation and resource allocation that may be coming down the pike, whether that's nationally or in California?
Well, I don't have any particular insights on the Farm Bill, unfortunately. But I did mention the low carbon fuel standard, which just in early November here, the California Air Resources Board kind of re-upped and made the targets for emission reductions from delivered fuels more stringent, and that's expected to bolster the market and the price for low carbon fuel standard credits. So that's one area that we're watching closely.
Right, obviously. Mathilde, from an international perspective, how much focus is there by your various clients and in your travels around the world on what happens in the U.S. in terms of our Farm Bill or other legislation or administrative policies?
They would like to bring products that could be considered as an alternative and fitting like in the bill. But I would say I have some clients working on the bio fertilizers of pesticide, but for now they are testing if there is a valuable market in Asia and then Europe, and then the next market is the US. But whenever a company decides to go outside of the EU, their first market is always the US. Or to some extent Southeast Asia, but Southeast Asia is more for novel foods, especially Singapore, so the grass equivalent. So it's not really like biomaterials, it's very much like a new type of sweetener, a new protein, but everything related to agtech, the US is always on the top in terms of foreign markets.
Great. Ernie?
Hey, Denny.
Yes,
sorry,
go
it's
ahead,
JD.
JD. Sure.
Just a quick question from the audience. We have a person asking for Betsy's point of view on a question. I know she has to take off, so I'm sorry to interject. But the question reads, we see a lot of programs for infrastructure for ethanol, higher blends, and renewable distillates for storage and retail dispensing. Will there be other USDA programs for RNG, biobutanol, and other renewable liquid fuels?
I would say that I guess outside of the infrastructure, it will come through other USDA departments. It won't come through rural business and cooperative service, most likely. We're pretty focused on the guaranteed loan program side, and then the grant that's going to support the first of its kind commercialization facility for the new for biorefineries, renewable diesels, and bio-based products.
Great.
Okay. Another question, Denny, if you give me an
Sure.
opportunity to get a couple of these in. Does
You
the
bet.
selection of Governor Burgum as the chair of the National Energy Council perhaps signal an all of the above approach for the Trump administration versus a drill baby drill, to quote the question exactly?
I'll take a swipe at that one, and then maybe Ernie has some thoughts. But Governor Burgum has, in fact, been an all of the above advocate for energy, especially wind energy in his home state. It's interesting that in addition to being the preferred designate, if you will, to be the Secretary of the Interior, he's going to chair what is going to be called an Energy Council that will consist of other cabinet members that have interest in energy. And so he'll have a pretty significant role to play. And I am encouraged that that role that he will be playing in his leadership is going to be based on many, many years of actual experience with the challenges and the opportunities presented by all forms, all of the above forms of energy. So I think he'll do well. Ernie, any thoughts? Have you worked with folks in Governor Burgum's state, or do you have any thoughts?
Sure. Well, I agree with your assessment, Denny. And again, we're very early in the nomination and the approval process and the onboarding of all of the sub-cabinet level officials. But his leadership in a state that has been embracing all forms of energy is going to be an important foundation to build upon. One of the first programs we started as a not-for-profit back in 2004 was a renewable energy initiative where we established a goal of the nation achieving 25% of its total energy that it consumes from renewables by the year 2025. And here we're 13 months away from the target deadline. North Dakota was very active with us as one of the states that really was advancing that goal. And it led to 38 governors endorsing the 25 by 25 renewable energy goal, of which the bioenergy solutions formed the backbone of this work. So they took their experiences at the state level, brought them into Washington, and the US Congress adopted it as a goal back in 2007, the last time we passed a comprehensive energy bill, ESA. So my take is very pragmatic. If the world is growing, if our energy demands are growing, if all of our demands, from food to action to improve the environment, we're going to need all tools in the toolbox. So for that reason, we're cautiously optimistic.
Great. JD, back to you.
Yeah, I wondered if Amber had a perspective on Governor Burgum.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably a pragmatist. What I see is that we need to build an electric grid that is a balanced portfolio of resources. Solar and wind are low cost and in many cases least cost resources. So I think we're going to continue to see the development of solar and wind on purely economic basis. Even setting aside the fact that many states have and will continue to have renewable procurement targets that will require the development of those resources. But then, we'll need to balance those resources with firm capacity. We need to, have a whole, portfolio basically as we plan for a reliable, affordable, safe energy system. So yeah, I think I would agree with Ernie. I'm fairly optimistic that logic and kind of least cost economics here will prevail, and the energy transition will continue apace because the momentum is just already there on an economic basis.
Great. Thanks.
Excellent.
Thanks, Amber.
Another question from one of our audience members that may go to Ernie, but Mathilde might have a view as well. What are each of your views on agricultural production of low CI score materials for fuels and chemicals? Bottom line, soil carbon capture, sequestration, and soil health.
So
Why
my
don't we start
view
with
on,
Ernie and go to Mathilde? Go ahead,
sure.
Ernie.
Well, my view is that that's the future. That's what we articulate as our vision, where we're going to be rewarded not just producing corn or soybeans or wheat or pork or eggs as a commodity, but to bundle the ecosystem services that come with it. So right now, with the tax incentives that have been authorized and put forward and are coming forward, there can be a golden opportunity to reimagine how we value the commodities that farmers produce so that they are rewarded for a lower carbon intensity score. And we think that is just one layer of ecosystem service delivery that can be monetized, and the marketplace can help provide the incentive that the producer needs to do even a better job of not just reducing the carbon intensity of the products that they're producing, but concurrently the biodiversity that they create, the water that they filter and store, and so forth. So I think that's a sign of the future. And Secretary Vilsack's $3 billion Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities program is the grand experiment to test how this can work. And we've been champions of this for a decade, and we're thrilled to see it come in to play through the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're confident that the private sector demand for these products is ultimately going to prevail over any government policy. So we're bullish on it.
It's interesting, Ernie, that we could attack a challenge, if you will, saying that the challenge is climate change. And it would produce a lot of solutions, if you will, and opportunities related to economic development. You can also flip that around. If you had somebody, I can't imagine this, but that said climate change was a hoax, you could say, let's look at the challenge of economic development, quality of life nationally and globally, creation of jobs, companies. And oh, by the way, as you're doing that, applying technology and scaling up great solutions for the bioeconomy, oh, by the way, you have a corollary beneficial effect on climate change. So it's just a matter of how you want to emphasize it rhetorically, and make sure that your resources and your regulations produce the results that in fact benefit the economy and quality of life. Mathilde, any thoughts on this?
I agree with Ernie. And then in Europe, we have an initiative coming from Denmark, implementing a carbon tax, especially for farmers with cows. But the way it's used, like instead of them paying fine for the amount of carbon that they are producing, they can be assisted to come up with more climate-friendly solutions. So how to capture the carbon, or just come up with more eco-friendly ways to produce. And hopefully, if it works, it's going to set an example for the rest of the countries within the European Union, and maybe be just copy-paste in another region.
Good example.
And Denny, there's where...
Go ahead, Ernie.
Yeah, I was going to say that's where we would agree with our European Union partners on the goal, but we disagree on the way to get there. So I think what's different between the approach that Denmark is pursuing and what we've been pursuing is one of how do you incentivize action that will deliver outcomes as opposed to force or regulate. So I think this administration is going to be stepping back from the command and control approach as the primary approach and looking for ways to stimulate economic opportunity. So we're hopeful, again, we'll see what happens, that these investments in climate smart commodity production will be a market pull that will really supercharge farmers' interest in this work. So they won't be doing the bare minimum that a regulation would require, but they'd be following market signals and delivering these outcomes that cut across multiple ecosystem services. So we'll see how things turn out.
In the best vein of farming, what you're saying is we need more carrot and less stick. to move the plow forward. Before we lose Betsy, I'd like to give you an opportunity to for any final thoughts and also to thank you for your continuing service running the development office.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that, Denny. And I actually was going to pipe in to respond to something that Mathilde and Ernie were saying. You know, I said I was in Southern Indiana, and yesterday was actually doing a site visit to a meat processing facility that's next to a wholesaler, and all of the meat that they're bringing in is all from their local farms. And what I found fascinating is that their largest buyer in the area is Indiana University. And now these are all local organic meats. The grower is taking part in climate smart commodities. They're doing all the research, looking to ultimately get, top dollar for the meat that they are raising and processing. But fascinating to me that Indiana University is serving this top quality meat at their university to all of their students. When I was in college, I saw them unloading meat at my college, and it was marked grade D, but edible. And here, right, these students are getting top quality meat, and the reason they're getting it goes right back to what you said, Ernie. Market driven. The students are demanding it. They are, we do have a market that is going to be led by this and influenced by this generation coming up that are paying attention as consumers to where their food is coming from, how it's produced, and how it's making its way to their plate. So I think there's a large role to play with climate smart commodities, with things like bio-preferred that are all voluntary, which, by the way, all of our programs are at rural development generally. So I just want to say thank you so much for having me. USDA does have, an important role to play as we move the bioeconomy forward. And I would argue that there's maybe no more important role than the roles that the rural communities can and will continue to play as we reindustrialize our nation together. So thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot, Betsy. And oh, by the way, expect questions to come your way from our participants in this webinar. And thanks in advance for
I'm
being able
happy
to
to
respond
answer
to those.
anything.
All right, thank you very much. So Amber, grade D but edible. Have you ever done any analysis in E3 that talks about that type of an approach? I want to be much more attentive to labels when I go to the supermarket looking for grade D or whatever.
Can't say we've done any analysis of food products or meat. We're focused on energy. I do know, and it's interesting that California is one of the largest dairy states in the country. We have a lot of dairy, and management of that manure waste is a major issue in the state. And so I was actually curious if Ernie had a perspective on how to balance kind of the local environmental impacts of, say, dairy and waste production, with the need for industrial scale food. It's a hot topic here in California where I'm based, as many communities are impacted by the dairy production in the state.
Ernie,
So that's
Ernie
actually
has
another
been in the waste area for many years. Decades ago, he had me as a guest speaker, a lunch speaker, that talked about chicken waste on the eastern shore of Maryland. Unfortunately, I was the lunch speaker, and I had to open it by saying, well, it's a crappy job, but somebody had to do it. So thanks a lot for Ernie. But Ernie knows exactly what you're talking about, this subject area, Amber. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that this is another good news story. economics, have gotten us to where we've had concentrations in all types of industries, and agriculture is another example of that. So it's hard to survive and make a living milking 100 or 200 cows. So we have increasingly larger production systems that have challenges but opportunities with them. So thanks to the bioeconomy and some of these incentives that have been authorized through the Inflation Reduction Act, we see an opportunity to significantly scale up the production of renewable natural gas. So when you have animals, they produce manure. Manure and the animals together are emitting methane. So there are increasing solution sets for the enteric emissions of methane in animals through dietary changes. But in terms of the manure, capturing the methane, putting it through a bioreactor to either produce electricity or a renewable natural gas that can be used to substitute for fossil gas is one of those opportunities that I think will be transforming agricultures go forward. And when we were in Baku just 2 weeks ago at the climate convention, we had a dairy farmer on one of our renewable energy panels who looked into the future and said, down the road, my farm might not be known as a dairy farm. My farm might be known as a clean energy production plant that produces milk as a co-product. So when you think about challenges and you open the realm of solution sets that are out there, you can get some interesting outcomes. And wouldn't that be great if we could have a strong bioeconomy and still plentiful supplies of wholesome, affordable milk and dairy products?
Great, well said.
I
JD,
do.
thoughts?
Yeah, so I did have sort of a quasi-related question that came in from our audience for Ernie and all. In addition to future IRA payments, what policy strategies are likely to establish soil carbon sequestration as a way for farmers and ranchers to monetize farmer ranchers' low CI production?
So I could take a quick crack and then let others go forward. The Growing Climate Solutions Act that was adopted by Congress a couple of years ago tasked USDA with coming up with a way to measure the ability of farmers to sequester carbon, to reduce the carbon intensity in the feedstocks that they produce. And we're in the early stages of these incentives and new market mechanisms. But the metrics and the ability to monitor, report, and verify are critically important. So USDA is the source authority nationally for helping to develop a acceptable metric that can be used to quantify the reductions in carbon intensity in products as well as soil carbon sequestration. So we're making good progress. We're not there yet, but I think it will be continuing to evolve over time so the market has confidence when a farmer offers a product that's been grown on ground that's been farmed with no-till and cover crop for 30 years, and they've been sequestering carbon deep into the ground, and they're producing commodities that have a lower CI score because of that. There'll be a way to measure that and assure the buyer that we're actually delivering a higher quality product that adds extra value. So this is a journey, but this is the glide path that we're on. And I think, again, back to the bioeconomy, that's why this is going to, I think, resonate with this administration. We don't need to frame everything through a climate lens and start with the climate crisis and what we have to do to respond to it. That's not going to go away. What is equally important is quality of life and jobs and growing economies. And the bioeconomy solutions that we can bring forward are going to check those boxes. And that's why I'm optimistic about the future of bioeconomy growth in the Trump administration, because we can deliver, and we can deliver in multiple dimensions at a lower cost.
Great. Amber, from your perspective, your business perspective, is there an increased demand do you think, for analysis about hey, what is the economic outlook for our business? I mean, and is it more in the public sector or the private sector about, hey, we need to know, we've got some tough decisions coming up, we need to set some priorities. What is your business future look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, interesting one, Denny. You know, I think there was almost an unleashing of interest in action once the election results became known. And what we saw was the uncertainty in 2023 was leading a lot of businesses to just sort of take a wait and see approach, because, you know, it was just too hard to plan. But then, you know, once we knew the outcome, that kind of allowed a lot of businesses to say, okay, we at least have a modicum of certainty of what to expect for the next 4 years. You know, let's move forward. And in particular, we're seeing a bit of a rush towards let's take advantage of these IRA tax incentives and tax credits and get as much funding allocated as possible before those go away. So it is certainly a busy time right now, as there's some expectation that there's a window of opportunity to take advantage of these IRA tax credits, and that those might be grandfathered in for projects that have already broken ground or have already advanced far enough in the planning process.
So as we wrap up our discussion here, I would like to turn to Mathilde. From your perspective, as I will use the term global citizen, how are you and your clients and the nations in which you operate and deal with looking at this election outcome and the new administration? Any particular thoughts on that?
Some of my clients were scared that it would mean the end of the bioeconomy, but I think it's a little bit too dramatic. And at the end of the day, I don't think like one person can change everything overnight. But they are also looking at ways that if there are changes that are going to be beneficial, so meaning is it going to be easier for them to enter the US market, or if they can find some loopholes in, I don't know, so some new product category that would be set up by the administration. And some will require pre-market approval, some not. And then if you have a hybrid product, maybe you can position your product as being the perfect solution in between. But they are also looking at what happened in the past, and they were able to do business during the first mandate of the future president. So they are not that pessimistic. Like they are just like looking at ways it's going to unfold. But to some extent, they are a bit afraid that some other regions, like in the EU, they are going to be a little bit too protective in the sense that GMO is something that is very controversial, that is needed, while some other countries, they might decide just to support the technology even more.
Got it. Okay, in way of wrap up, Amber, more challenges or opportunities here in the bioeconomy? What's your sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all need to take the long view. It's important to think about, you know, the changes over the next 4 years, but the energy transformations that we're seeing are actually unfolding over a multi-decade time frame. We know that climate impacts aren't going away, and if anything, energy resilience is going to become more salient going forward. And when I think about energy resilience, I also think about the ecosystem services that the agricultural and natural and working land sectors can provide towards climate resilience. So these things are all interconnected, and we know that regardless of whether we talk about climate as much over the next 4 years, and it certainly won't be incentivized the way it was under the Biden administration. We're still going to need to address this existential threat over a long time frame, and that's going to require the same toolkit, the same strategies that we've always known, energy efficiency, electrification, low carbon fuels, and carbon sequestration in the form of natural and working lands and other technologies. So, we know what we need to do, and I think states and corporations are going to step up to help fill some of the gap over the next couple of years.
Well said. Ernie, clearly your message has been you seeing more opportunity than challenges. I mean, the challenges are daunting, certainly, but there's a great work underway to continue that.
Yeah, Denny, and as I see the bioeconomy really growing and taking off going forward to meet the demands of a growing world population and the challenges we face, I think it's important to remember that we need to be making sure we're adopting circular approaches to the bioeconomy and not going down a linear path. So we're putting a lot of emphasis on that in our work in the UN system right now. As we talk about the bioeconomy, we're emphasizing we need to transition from take, make, and dispose approaches to the bioeconomy to make, reuse, recycle, retain value. And circularity has been embraced in many other sectors, and it's relatively new as a discussion topic to the farm community, but it's actually been something we've relied on for hundreds of years here in the United States. We found that our grain production systems and animal production systems became siloed and separated, but they really can come together where the animals and the row cropping operations can be mutually supportive. The manure from the animals can be used to substitute for purchased fertilizers. The cattle can graze and maintain a healthy resource base that supports more photosynthesis and soil carbon sequestration. So circularity is going to be a very important focus for all of us in the bioeconomy as we move forward and grow.
Absolutely, fully concur. We'll have to have another webinar just talking about circularity and all of the manifestations here. JD, thank you so much for managing our questions. As we said at the outset, we knew we weren't going to be able to get to all of the questions, but we'll be able to keep this conversation going with participants. If you want to contact our panelists, please do. Lee Enterprises will enable that. But I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank all of the attendees at this webinar for your attention. JD, over to you.
Well, first of all, Denny, thank you for doing such an able job of coordinating such talent together. I appreciate what you do, and we at LEC wouldn't be what we are without your help. So thank you. Amber, Betsy, Mathilde, and Ernie, what can we say? We're thrilled that you were able to join us. We'd love to have you back for round 2 or maybe even different approaches, but thank you again. For all folks who are unfamiliar or do not yet get our monthly newsletter, we are providing links here, QR codes that you can take pictures of to get yourself signed up, and you could get our monthly or bi-monthly newsletter service. And really, from all of us here at LEC, we wish you and yours a wonderful, happy holiday. We hope that all of us continue to strive and drive the bioeconomy. I think we've gotten some sage wisdom around how we can reframe what we do in a way that is mutually beneficial to all involved, regardless of party. And so with that, let me just say a hearty thank you once again to our panelists, to our esteemed moderator, and we wish you all the best and a happy new year and happy holidays.
Happy New Year, everybody. Happy holidays.
Thank you, guys.
Well, bye.
Cheers.